June 9, 2013. The majestic forests of Gifford-Pinchot National Forest in Washington are shrouded in calm and silence. On this day, 19-year-old Maureen Anu Kelly, wearing only a fanny pack with a knife, matches, and a compass, stepped resolutely into the dense greenery of the forest. She embarked on a spiritual journey that, according to her, was supposed to lead her to inner enlightenment and peace. Her friends, who stayed at the Canyon Creek campsite, anxiously watched her disappear from view. No one expected that this walk would turn into a disappearance that would remain unsolved for years. The sun was already setting, its last rays breaking through the dense foliage of the trees, creating mysterious shadows on the ground. The warm day began to give way to a cool evening. Maureen seemed oblivious to the cold, fully immersed in her thoughts and goals. Her friends recall that she often talked about wanting to go into the forest for a spiritual quest, but no one could imagine that this desire could turn into a tragedy. Maureen promised to return by midnight, but the hours ticked by and she was still absent. As night fell on the forest, the temperature dropped sharply. It was getting colder, and Maureen's friends' concern grew. They began to realize that with each passing hour, the likelihood of her return decreased. At 4 to 5 degrees Celsius, without clothing and appropriate equipment, the chances of survival became critical. Time passed, but no sound or trace of Maureen was heard. In desperation, her friends contacted the Skamania County Sheriff's Office and reported her disappearance. The morning of June 10th greeted search teams ready for an intensive search. Local law enforcement and volunteers thoroughly examined every corner of the forest, hoping to find at least the slightest clue. But the barefoot tracks found at the site led to Forest Service Road 54 and then disappeared. The dogs could not pick up the trail, complicating the rescuers' task. The Gifford-Pinchot Forest, with its steep slopes and dense thickets, became an insurmountable obstacle in the search for Maureen. With each passing day, hope for a favorable outcome faded. More than 10 years have passed, and the mystery of Maureen Kelly's disappearance has never been solved. What happened to the young girl, full of life and hope? Authorities have been unable to find her body or any evidence indicating foul play. The theory of hypothermia remained the main one, but her family and friends continued to believe that Maureen might have voluntarily left and did not want to be found. This story is filled with mysteries and many unexplained details that haunt both relatives and those who followed the investigation. Maureen Kelly's disappearance is not just a story about a missing person. It is a deep and emotional mystery that touches the hearts and minds of many people. Every day, every hour, her absence reminds us of how quickly and inexplicably a person can disappear, leaving behind only questions and unsolved mysteries. This case makes us think about the fragility of life, the power of nature, and how little we know about the inner world and the intentions of those who decide to go into solitude. How did it happen that a young girl full of life and energy disappeared without a trace? What pushed her to take this step, and why didn't she return? These questions remain unanswered, and perhaps that is what makes Maureen Kelly's story so captivating and frightening at the same time. The disappearance of Maureen Kelly caused a strong reaction among local residents and law enforcement agencies. On the morning of June 10, 2013, a large-scale search operation began. Skamania County Sheriff's Office staff, along with volunteers, went into the Gifford-Pinchot forests, hoping to find any traces of Maureen. The first step was a thorough examination of the area around the Canyon Creek campsite. Dense thickets and steep slopes made this task extremely difficult, but the searchers were determined. In the initial search stage, investigators found barefoot tracks leading from the campsite to Forest Service Road 54. These tracks matched Maureen's foot size, giving hope for her discovery. However, the tracks unexpectedly ended on the paved road, and the dogs could not pick up the further trail. This was strange, as the disappearance of the tracks could indicate that Maureen was either picked up by someone in a car at this spot or managed to somehow disappear without leaving any traces. The search continued with the use of helicopters and drones, but the dense vegetation and challenging terrain complicated the work of the search teams. Every hour was precious, as the lack of clothing and low nighttime temperatures significantly reduced Maureen's chances of survival. Despite using modern technology and attracting many volunteers, the search yielded no results. Increasing attention was paid to the possibility that Maureen might have gotten lost and died of hypothermia. especially since the temperature at night dropped to 4 or 5 degrees Celsius. During the investigation, it became known that Maureen had a deep interest in spiritual practices and often talked about the need for cleansing and self-searching. Her friends said she often mentioned her desire to spend some time alone in nature to find inner peace and harmony. This explained why none of her friends were surprised when she decided to go into the forest for a spiritual quest. But the lack of clothing and minimal equipment caused serious concern among her loved ones. With each passing day, the search became more intense. New volunteers, wilderness survival specialists, and dog handlers were involved. Local residents also actively participated in the search, organizing small groups to survey the surrounding forests and valleys. However, despite all efforts, no new traces of Maureen could be found. Some volunteers involved in the search spoke of the difficulties they faced. Steep slopes, dense thickets, and dangerous animals made this area extremely difficult to survey. Each day of the search was a real test for all participants, and despite their efforts, the Gifford Pinchot Forest continued to keep its secrets. During the search, some details about Maureen, previously unknown to the public, came to light. She grew up in Vancouver, Washington, and was raised by a single mother. From childhood, Maureen was interested in music and often posted videos of herself playing the ukulele and singing on YouTube. Her friends described her as a very calm and positive person, always ready to help others. She was known for her kindness and openness, and her disappearance came as a shock to everyone who knew her. By the second week of the search, new hypotheses about what might have happened to Maureen began to emerge. While initial efforts focused on checking the immediate vicinity of the campsite, investigators decided to expand the search area. Experts suggested that Maureen might have gotten lost and died of hypothermia. The temperature at night dropped to 4 to 5 degrees Celsius, which, without clothing and proper equipment, could be fatal. However, the absence of any body traces or other signs of Maureen's presence suggested that something else might have happened. Investigators decided to concentrate their efforts on checking more remote and hard-to-reach areas of the forest. Additional resources were involved, including specially trained dogs that could pick up a trail even in the densest thickets. At the same time, helicopters with thermal imagers flew over the territory, hoping to detect signs of heat that could indicate a person's presence. One of the key moments in the investigation became possible thanks to information from local residents. It turned out that on the day of Maureen's disappearance, several people saw a young girl resembling her near one of the hiking trails. These testimonies gave new impetus to the investigation, and investigators focused their efforts on surveying this area. Tracks were found that could belong to Maureen, but they again ended unexpectedly, complicating the establishment of a clear route of her movement. A theory of a possible injury also emerged. The Gifford Pinchot Forest is famous for its steep slopes and dangerous trails. Maureen might have slipped and fallen, sustaining serious injuries that prevented her from returning to the campsite. However, no traces of blood or other signs of injuries were found at the site. This also complicated the task, as the likelihood of her body being in an inaccessible place was high. During this time, numerous reports began to come in from people claiming to have seen Maureen in various parts of the state. Investigators checked each of these reports, but none were confirmed. This gave rise to new theories and hypotheses, but also added chaos to the already complex investigation. Many false leads and useless tips only increased the sense of hopelessness and concern among Maureen's relatives and friends. Investigators also considered the possibility of third-party involvement. Although no evidence of foul play was found, the theory of abduction or attack could not be completely ruled out. Maureen was a young, attractive girl, and the forests could hide many dangers, both natural and human. Additional checks, interviews with local residents, and tourists were conducted in this direction, but all to no avail. At this stage, active attempts to draw attention to the case through the media began. Press conferences were held where police representatives and Maureen's family appealed to the public for help. As a result of this campaign, more volunteers and resources were attracted. But despite all efforts, no traces of Maureen were found. At some point, the investigation began to stall, and new approaches were needed to move it forward. During the investigation, law enforcement officers interviewed many people, including Maureen's friends, family, and anyone who might have information about her intentions and plans. Each witness provided valuable data that helped form a general picture of events before and after the disappearance. Some friends claimed that Maureen seemed somewhat distant and lost in thought in the weeks leading up to the disappearance. She talked about the need to rethink her life and search for a spiritual path, confirming her intention to go into the forest for a spiritual quest. Rumors emerged that Maureen might have been influenced by some sects or groups promoting extreme spiritual practices. Investigators conducted many checks in this direction, trying to find any traces indicating Maureen's connection with such groups. However, no evidence supporting this theory was found. This did not stop the spread of rumors and speculations in the local community, where the topic of sects and their influence always sparked lively interest. Investigators were also attracted by one of Maureen's acquaintances, who had recently returned to town. This person, previously having problems with the law, was known for his aggressive tendencies and ambiguous behavior. He often got into trouble and was involved in several fights. Investigators thoroughly checked his alibi for the time of Maureen's disappearance. Despite his suspicious past, the alibi was confirmed, and no evidence of his involvement was found. Nevertheless, this suspect remained under close surveillance, as some details of his testimony raised doubts. He claimed not to have seen Maureen on the day of her disappearance, but some witnesses said they saw him near the Canyon Creek campsite. This contradiction prompted investigators to continue checking his movements and contacts that day, trying to find any inconsistencies or additional clues. Maureen's friends and family also shared information about her emotional state in the months before her disappearance. Some of them noted that Maureen was very concerned and often talked about the need for changes in her life. Her interest in spiritual practices and meditations became deeper, and she sometimes spent days in seclusion, reflecting and meditating. This led investigators to think that Maureen might have voluntarily gone into the forest, seeking spiritual enlightenment, but was unprepared for the harsh conditions of the wilderness. During the investigation, it was revealed that in the area where Maureen disappeared, there had been previous cases of people going missing. In most cases, these incidents were related to the challenging conditions and underestimation of nature's dangers. This added additional tension and complexity to the work of investigators, who were trying to understand whether these cases were connected to Maureen's disappearance or if it was just a coincidence. Several months after Maureen's disappearance, a random tourist stumbled upon an old abandoned cabin in a remote area of the forest. Inside the cabin, there were signs of recent human presence: food remains, traces of a fire, and several items that might have belonged to Maureen. Among these items was a small notebook containing notes presumably made by Maureen in the first days after her disappearance. This discovery gave investigators hope that she might have survived longer than previously thought. The notes in the notebook were short and emotional. Maureen wrote about her experiences, how she tried to find her way back but got lost in the dense forest. She mentioned the intense cold and fatigue gradually overcoming her. These notes confirmed that she had indeed been in the cabin, but what happened to her afterward remained a mystery. The last page contained a note written with a trembling hand. "If anyone finds this, please tell my family that I love them." This unexpected twist forced investigators to review some of their theories. Perhaps Maureen managed to survive in the first days after her disappearance, and she found refuge in this cabin. But what happened to her next remained a mystery. Many new questions arose. Why did she leave this place? Where could she have gone next? And what happened to her after the trail again disappeared? Investigators once again turned to the public for help. Media reports about the new find attracted new volunteers. Additional search groups were organized to survey the area around the cabin. However, despite all efforts, no new traces of Maureen could be found. The area around the cabin was difficult to survey due to dense vegetation and complex terrain, making the search extremely challenging. Meanwhile, various theories and assumptions about what might have happened to Maureen began to appear in the media. One of the most discussed versions was that she might have been abducted or become a victim of violent actions. However, no evidence supporting this version was found. Others suggested that Maureen might have consciously disappeared and was hiding, possibly experiencing a mental disorder or severe stress. One of the most shocking turns in the investigation occurred when one of Maureen's friends, who participated in the initial search, began to be suspected of possible involvement in her disappearance. This person, known for his aggressive tendencies and past full of legal troubles, was thoroughly interrogated by investigators. His alibi for the time of Maureen's disappearance was checked, and although no direct evidence of his involvement was found, suspicions did not entirely disappear. This situation caused a storm of emotions among Maureen's friends and family. Some of them were convinced of his innocence, while others believed that investigators did not pay enough attention to this suspect from the beginning. This tension only added drama to the already complex investigation. Suddenly, several months after the cabin find, something unexpected happened. A tourist traveling through a remote part of the forest stumbled upon bones partially hidden under soil and leaves. The find was immediately reported to the police, and a thorough examination began. DNA testing confirmed that the remains belonged to Maureen Kelly. This turn of events finally answered the main question: what happened to Maureen? But along with the answer came many new questions. How did she get to this remote place? Why was her body partially buried? These questions remained unanswered, and investigators continued to work on clarifying them. It was clear that Maureen tried to survive, but something prevented her from reaching safety. Maureen Kelly's disappearance has become one of the most mysterious and disturbing missing persons cases in the region. Every detail of this story, every new clue only highlighted the complexity and unpredictability of the fate of a person who decided to embark on a spiritual quest in the wilderness. And although official versions indicated the possibility of death from hypothermia or injury, many people still hoped for a miracle. More than 10 years have passed since the day Maureen disappeared, but her story continues to disturb and attract people's attention worldwide. Every year, on the anniversary of her disappearance, her family and friends gather in the Gifford Pinchot forests, hoping that one day they will find answers to their questions and find peace. However, even with the discovery of Maureen's remains, many questions remain unanswered. This story continues to be a subject of discussion and investigation, as every new clue could lead to a revelation. The study of the nature and conditions in which Maureen tried to survive continues. Survival and psychology experts are trying to understand what might have prompted a young girl to take such a risky step, and what actually happened in the last days of her life. This story remains open, inviting further exploration and understanding of human nature and endurance in the most extreme conditions. Maureen Kelly's disappearance has become one of the most mysterious and tragic stories of modern times. After months of intensive searches, numerous hypotheses and theories, and the involvement of various specialists, her remains were found deep in the forest, answering the main question about her fate. But along with this answer came many new questions that remain unclear to this day. Research has shown that Maureen likely died shortly after leaving the campsite, but the cause of her death and the circumstances leading to it remain unclear. Was it an accident, the result of an injury or hypothermia, or were there more sinister events? The found notes indicated her despair and fatigue, which might suggest her struggle for survival in the harsh conditions of the wilderness. For Maureen's family and friends, her loss became an unbearable tragedy. They finally got a chance to say goodbye to her, but many questions remained unanswered. The pain of loss and the uncertainty of what happened to her continue to haunt them. This case serves as a reminder of the fragility of human life and the importance of being prepared and informed when venturing into the wilderness. For the public, this case also became a lesson. Maureen Kelly's disappearance drew attention to the importance of safety and preparedness when going into nature, the need for careful planning and understanding of the risks associated with such journeys. It also highlighted the importance of support and cooperation among people in difficult times, where every contribution can be decisive. In conclusion, Maureen Kelly's story will remain in memory as an example of human fragility and resilience. Her search and discovery showed that even in the most hopeless situations, one should not lose hope and faith in the possibility of finding answers and justice. May her memory be bright and her story serve as a lesson and a warning to all of us. If you were touched by this story, please support our channel, like and subscribe. Share this video so that more people learn about Maureen Kelly's tragedy and the importance of safety when going into nature. Leave your comments and opinions below. Your support can help draw attention to other similar cases and prevent such tragedies in the future.